along Australia to USA, and from Russia to Africa. We are very honored to have you all with us. It is also a delight to see so. Hello, Tom. Just in time, and we're going to start the session. So we are very, very actually delighted to see so many of our national colleagues with us. And to be very frank, we never get an opportunity to interact living in this, country. Somehow we never come across so many of you. And this is such a beautiful way to connect online. You know us at least now, and partly we know you by your name and by your campuses. So this series, just to a brief introduction, the series was conceived at least 6 months ago when we thought that global and national inequities needed to be addressed. But recent events have really been mind-boggling in the sense that DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion are now dirty words in some parts of the world, and you can see the effects like a volcano reaching like a pack of cards, one after another, affecting so many other parts of the world. So we wanted to highlight the need for embracing diversity. And now more than ever, there's a need to go down this path whereby we need to collaborate or at least get to know each other and our differences and work together for whatever it is worth in this. Sometimes I have heard in our previous sessions, some participants talk about how seems like a losing battle, but the main takeaway has been that we need to keep on doing whatever we can, in whatever capacity we are. So the real force actually behind these webinars are our 10 outstanding experts who agreed to join us in this series and made this series a reality. I am indebted to their largesse and to their generosity of time and effort for the sake of knowledge equity. What could be more powerful than that? Our first session was by Penny and Helen, and they talked about set the base. It was a foundational sort of a webinar that set the pace for the multidimensional layers of educational inequity that exist. And Helen talked about how it affects holistic students' development. Here, I'd like to point out that we have not looked only at student academic success as the mark for their learning or for their job of an institution. What is the task at a? We are looking at the holistic success of the student and a holistic well-being. So the second session actually went a bit further. It focused largely on holistic student development. And it talked about how various dimensions of education, institutional structures, governance, curriculum, and pedagogy bring about equity across a diverse student body. In both these sessions, we had nearly 500 plus participants join us. Not all stayed with us for the 2-hour session, but mostly, came in as they could and took away something from fruitful out of these sessions. Now, what was the framework on which we based our series? The framework was the Diversity Wheel by Lowe et al. And it talks about 5 layers with multiple components within each that come together. And it is the intersection of these layers that actually bring about in each of us a unique personality, or a unique person that is us. And so I am sometimes prone to believe that if you consider the components, their variance in intensity and in their understanding by each person. No two persons will be alike in terms of their diversity, values, or whatever. And so there you have extreme, a very vibrant tapestry of humankind and a beautiful mosaic. I'll stop here and ask Fatima to do the netiquettes, and then we'll proceed on with the session for today.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session. I'm going to briefly run you through the netiquette for the session today. Before we begin, please make sure that your Zoom display name includes your university, followed by your full name, so that we can track your attendance. Please make sure that you follow the format given on the screen. Rather than typing your name into the chat, kindly adhere to this simple request. You will be muted during the session. If you have any questions, type them in the chat. Please note that a minimum of 75% of participation is mandatory for certification. And lastly, this session is being recorded and the recording will be available on our YouTube channel. Thank you once again for joining us. Over to you, Dr. Ruxana.
Yeah, and that reminds me, I forgot to introduce who we are. We are a CLT at Forman Christian College University in Lahore. And we are a very small team of 4. There is Bavish, our deputy head, a brilliant academic and instructional technologist. Please unvideo and wave, Bavish. Thank you. Then we have Gohar, our office manager, who ties things together and keeps everything in order. Hello, Gohar. Thank you. And then there is, of course, you've seen Fatima, who is the education developer, the youngest and the latest addition to our team. I'm very, very delighted. We are a very closely knit team, and I think I've started to realize that Maha, we will need a session on burnout after this series. We are really, running from one session to another. So today's session agenda, as you can see, is about inclusive pedagogies, which means culturally appropriate teaching strategies to address different educational needs, socially just care, and critical consciousness. And please remind me, Maha, to ask you, you use this word, the critical consciousness and critical AI literacy, and I would really want to learn a bit more about that from you as you in your PowerPoint. Looking forward to that. And I think there's nothing better to describe the outcome that we want is the socially just. The justice, social justice is the framework that we should be all focusing on. And of course, then Tom will talk about student engagement and transformative learning. Very quickly to say that Tom is from the University of Westminster, UK. He's the assistant head of school student experience in the School of Finance and Accounting at the University of Westminster, UK. Mahabali, who is our first speaker, is I have known her a long time, and if I am honored to call her a friend, I'm totally in awe of her scope of knowledge. Every time I have met her and heard her, I'm like, I'm not there. And when will I get there? Sort of a thing. She's a professor of practice at the Center for Learning and Teaching at the American University in Cairo. She has a PhD in education from the University of Sheffield, UK. So there, Tom, you have some sort of a connection there with the UK part. What is interesting is that she never stops doing things outside of her work as if that wasn't enough. She's a co-founder of Virtually Connecting Organization, a grassroots movement that challenges academic gatekeeping at conferences. This is the first time I've heard of something like that even exists. And she's a co-facilitator of Equity Unbound. And I think if you could leave a link for Equity Unbound.
I just did.
Oh, you did. And also, I think you're doing the MyFest or something that
I left
you're doing
a link to
now.
MyFest. Yeah,
yes, please. You're doing multiple things, and I don't know how you manage, and you have a full family life. And so there she's Equity Unbound is an equity-focused, open, connected intercultural learning curriculum, which has been branched into academic community and activities, including continuity with care, socially just academia, and a collaborative with one higher education, if I may say. Is that it? And a
It's one
community
higher
building,
education.
one higher education, yes. Community building, resources, and my festival that you do every year. An innovative 3-month professional journey where you keep on doing professional sessions, learning sessions for 3 months, intermittently. And how do you not get burned out is the question I want to ask. So I will leave it to you just to say we are very thankful for some 2,439 registrations. There were 134 international registrations from 50 countries that will avail of the resources. And actually, there are 2,305 from our 300 campuses. I am thankful to NAHI. NAHI is the equivalent of, we have called it the Higher Education Commission. It's also the University Grants Commission in UK at some time. I wonder if it's the same, carries the same name now. And so they collaborated in supporting and spreading the word to all the national campuses, some 300 campuses. And so this large body, and I'm very, very happy that we will be able to partake of the knowledge that and we will, I hope, be able to transfer it to our context. So Mahabali, over to you. And then Tom will come on after you and he will introduce himself. Right, Tom? I'm not doing that.
All good. I've got it covered.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Roxana, and thank you to everyone from FCCU for this invitation. Thank you to all of you for making time to meet today. I'll talk for about 45 minutes and then hand over to Tom for another 45, and then hopefully there will be time for questions towards the end. I have put the link to my slides in the chat, and I will put them again. They are. You can follow along there. You can give me comments afterwards because there might not be time to do every single thing that's on the slides. So Roxana asked me to talk about inclusive pedagogies, and I want to talk about use of culturally appropriate teaching strategies to address different educational needs. I'm here in Egypt. You're all from Pakistan. A lot of my friends in high school were from Pakistan because I grew up in Kuwait. So I feel a very big connection with Pakistan. It's in my heart. And someday I will be there in person, Roxana, inshallah. And like FCCU, I teach at an American university in a global South country. And so it's very difficult not to be aware of social justice because there's implicit coloniality around us all the time, right? But even if you are in a university that is a national university, knowledge in general tends to be coming to us from the North and the West, and it's always important to be very aware of these things. So I start by saying Assalamu alaikum. I know those in Pakistan know what this means. If you're not aware, it just means peace be upon you. And it works for day and night and high and by. So it's really good when you're doing a session across time zones because it might be nighttime for some people and daytime for others. And I always like to ask how you're feeling today at the beginning of a session. And so I do, when Roxana was talking about Sleepless in Southwestern University, I was like, Sleepless in Seattle is an activity that I do where I ask people, how are you feeling and where are you? Let me know in the chat. I'm going to ask you a lot of questions in the chat as we go on. And I know there's over 200 people, so if not everybody wants to participate or you're not able to type today, that is not a problem. But I would love to hear how people are feeling. So whoever is inclined to say how you're feeling, I know there's a lot of folks from all over Pakistan, people feeling great, excited for the session, good in Pakistan, feeling happy, blessed in Karachi, alhamdulillah, good, waiting for the webinar for 2 hours. I'm sorry, we're starting it late. Thank you for those who put the slides again in the chat. Hey, good in Kyrgyzstan, thank you for joining. I'm glad so many of you are feeling well, good but tired, and it's totally okay to be both, right? People happy, excited, drained but curious. It's a good place to be. I'm usually physically tired but mentally stimulated. Warm welcome, virtual Pakistan. Feeling the feels. Okay. All right. Thank you all for sharing. Feeling excited and motivated. I'm so happy to hear that. And I will, in Malaysia as well, and Italy. Thank you. All right, I will move on. I apologize if I don't read every single response because there's 200 of you, but I will read as many as I can as I go along. Here again is the link to my slides. You can comment on them later, so don't just feel like this is the only time we have together. If you want to go back to the slides later, and by the way, they're on an open license, non-commercial, but if you want to use these slides, again, you can use anything from the slides. Just attribute me, Mahabali, for doing them, and don't sell the slides. Other than that, you can do whatever you like with them. You can use them in classes, you can use them in presentations. They won't download, but they will allow you to open them, I think. If not, I'll change the settings, but I'm pretty sure they should allow you to open and put comments. All right, so the plan for today, expect a lot of interaction. I'm going to do a chatterfall where I ask a few questions, and I'm going to share with you 4 models related to social justice that are all models I co-developed. So they are culturally relevant to me because I created them here in Egypt, but almost all of them are created with other people all over the world. And then I'm going to give you a choice of whether you want to apply these models more to how to do online community building or more to AI. Okay, so to begin with, I want to know what nourishes you lately. So Roxana was talking about burnout, and I think one of the key things to help people with burnout is to know what are the things that give you nourishment, what keeps you going. I'm going to check the settings of the slides right now and make sure that they're open for commenting. I'm going to just unshare my screen while I do that. Let me know what nourishes you, what replenishes you when you're very stressed out. I'm seeing the settings on the slides and it says anyone on the link can comment and anybody can download. So I'm not sure why you're not able to, but I know Roxana was able to open them. So hopefully she can send them to you again some other way. All right, people are nourished by achievement and family and du'a and positive thoughts and family came up a couple times. Namaz, I don't know what that is, and reflection sometimes. Journaling, students, fantastic students, yes. Netflix and chill, yeah, sometimes. Kids, family, hope, self-motivation, prayers, friends, education, acknowledgement. Yes, acknowledgement is also important. Feel like people appreciate us. Watching web series, validation, journaling, family motivation, being progress in such an AI world. Yeah, catharsis. Okay. Music and research, movies, shopping, book reading. Every day is a new day, progress every day. The best meaningful work is interaction with students. Thank you all. Respect. Yes. Journaling, curiosity, family. And we need to always, whatever you write here, make sure you try to do a little bit of this every week. Because sometimes we get overwhelmed and we forget to spend enough time with family, or we forget to turn on the music while we're working, you know? Home gardening. The good thing about gardening is it'll make you have to do it, right? If you forget to do it, you're going to spoil the garden. So it reminds you. Doing research is nourishing for you. It's great to be doing work that nourishes you as well. Staying mentally present and open to new ideas. I love that. Interactive sessions. Okay, I'm happy to hear that this nourishes you. Watching yourself, student satisfaction. Yes. Drinking tea. I've discovered tea during COVID and I like it now. I didn't used to like it. Grooming and self-care. Remember to do that. Yeah, diary writing, curiosity. And I hope some of you are getting ideas from what others are saying as well. You know, oh, I used to do gratitude journaling and I stopped, and that reminds me, you know. All right, thank you all for sharing. Inventing new things. Okay. All right, my next question to you is, well, it's not a question, it's this, and it's related to the diagram that Roxana was sharing earlier. So this is a quote from Ruha Benjamin, who is an African-American scholar whom I respect very, very much. And she says, growing the world we want is like the slow tending of a garden. So speaking of someone who finds gardening nourishing. And when you're tending a garden, you're transforming plants by fostering relationships, trust, skills, community accountability, and healing. I was told I can't take questions, but you can ask a question in the chat and I'll try to respond to it. So to grow that world that we want, it requires cultivating new habits internally, seeding restorative ways of being together interpersonally, uprooting practices of inequality institutionally, and planting alternative possibilities structurally. This goes back to the diagram that Roxana was sharing about the different levels of diversity, because some things have to happen internally in yourself as a person, in your personality, in the way you talk to yourself and the way you behave with yourself. Some of it is about how you interact with individual others and your personality and your professional relationships and your personal relationships. It's interpersonal. And some of it is about institutional level practices and imagining possibilities on the structural level. And what I love about the diagram that Roxana shared is there's also this era level where we're talking about what's happening in the political climate in the world and the historical context and how all of those things affect us as individuals and as institutions. They affect our students because they are whole humans. They are not just students. They are everything else living in this world that we live in. So if we only concentrate, if anything I say today, if you only concentrate on your internal work, focusing on what you do with your family and with your students, and you ignore the fires burning outside around all of us, what is happening in Palestine, what is happening in the US, all of these things, what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, all of these things are affecting all of us in one way or another. So if we just keep doing what we're doing and pretend nothing else is happening outside, that's not going to work. We'll eventually be consumed by the negative energy happening from outside. And if we only concentrate on putting out the blaze and we work alone doing that, we will eventually burn out, which is what Roxana was asking about right now. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that not everything is within our control and not everything is within our influence. And so I want to ask you, what is a fire outside your control that has burning you out recently? What's been happening around you that's been contributing to you feeling burnt out and you can't control it? What is that thing for you? Yes, thank you, Tayaba. At the end, we're all human and stay human only if we feel sympathy. Sometimes relationships are outside control. A lot of times they're within our control to keep them or not to keep them. Workload, yeah, a lot of time the workload, although I don't know how much agency we have to say no. Intolerance in society, for sure. Competitors in your business. Yes, you can't control your competitors. Gaza, of course, and power games, yes. The environment, what's happening to the environment, both political and actual climate, like Earth's climate, scorching heat of the sun, sleeping members of the team. Oh, wow. Wars, just wars everywhere. Yes, for sure. Rapidly deteriorating human relationships. We're all connected. We can't avoid what's happening to others. Society, realized inequality and racism. It's living in small towns, not listening, communicating with boss. Outbreaks, for sure. Results. Selfish lab mates. I'm sorry to hear that. Unable to stop the genocide on Palestine on our own. Yeah, Gaza is a strong one. Toxic environment, workload overload. Some of these things are institutional, so it feels like some humans should be able to change them, you know? No productive work, aspiring to work in a prestigious place, ongoing violence in Gaza as well, helplessness and just draining, monotony, the balance between professional and personal life, chaos, Trump's tariffs, environmental sustainability, boycotts of international brands. Thank you all for sharing all of that. I think it's important to recognize that these things are there and that they get in the way of us being able to do everything we want. People talking about funding scholarships, politics in the institutions, cultural change, mental health connection, again, workload. And these are things, they appear all of us to be outside of our control, but I wonder, is there any element of them that's within our control? So we'll talk about this. And so recognizing not only are there all these different fires outside of our control, but there are also, as Roxana was saying, and I know that Penny mentioned Nancy Fraser's model of social justice, which includes economic, cultural, and political injustice. I think there are even more dimensions to injustice than in Nancy Fraser's model, but I find it a very useful model because a lot of times we focus on economic inequality and we don't think about all these other things. So this Roumy cheese analogy talks about the need for multi-layered strategies of inclusive pedagogy to redress multidimensional oppressions and inequalities. And so I'm going to explain how I approach the model and then give you some examples. So this is actually inspired by a Swiss cheese analogy. So if you know Swiss cheese, it's a yellow cheese that you usually cut in layers and it has holes in it. And so when applied as an analogy for respiratory illnesses, Ian McKay created this diagram where if you think about COVID or any respiratory illness, remember it wasn't enough to just wear masks or just to take the vaccines. You had to do all these different things of take the vaccine, do the quarantine, stay home, wash your hands. And some of these things are things we do personally, like wearing masks, and some of them are things that are shared or government responsibilities, like vaccines. And having different layers, because there's a hole, the virus can get through a hole. But because the holes are in different places in each layer, you have more layers, you can protect yourself more from the vaccine. This resonates, right? This makes sense. We know this. We know you have to do more than one thing to try to avoid getting COVID. Now, my version of it uses Roumy cheese. If any of you know, Egypt has a kind of yellow cheese called Roumy cheese. It's more salty than Swiss cheese, and it has black peppercorns in it. And so I'm using this for education, and I'm saying instead of the virus, let's think about all the diverse causes for inequity and need for care. Things like racism, classism, heteropatriarchy, ableism, neuronormativity, xenophobia, all of these different things, they can be systemic. So a government can have policies, for example, that don't allow immigrants to have a good life, and then this encourages the media to say bad things about immigrants, so people become xenophobic. Or it could be personal. So it could be that the government has good policies, like in Germany, they have good policies for Syrian immigrants, but the individuals in their relationships with Syrian refugees are not good. So that's interpersonal. And of course, it's intersectional. So if someone is both a woman, so they're a minority because they are women, and they are also of a certain nationality, they may get discriminated against. And this is very contextual to your country and to your institution, right? And so the black peppercorns here, for me, are something that some people like and some people don't. So if we use every layer of the Roumy cheese as an educational strategy that you use, it will help address some of these issues and not others. So for example, culturally relevant pedagogy, and I don't know if this is something that you've heard of before, but the idea of culturally relevant pedagogy is to recognize, please, how stress points being to one of the 5 layers of diversity. Yeah, exactly. And those some are out of your control, some are within your control. Exactly. Yes, Roxanne. So the different layers of the Roumy cheese address different things. So if you did culturally relevant pedagogy, this is a kind of pedagogy where we recognize that our students come into our class and they have different cultural backgrounds. They're not all identical. And that our curriculum may or may not represent all of their cultures. So one element of trying to be more culturally diverse is to make sure, for example, in my class, I teach at the American University in Cairo. I have to teach in English, but I do bring in speakers from India, from Nigeria. Like if I'm watching a video, I bring videos of people of color. I bring readings by Arab women who write in English. I try to make sure that the students can connect more closely to the writers that we're discussing in our class, to the videos that we see in our class. They are not all white, male Western. The other way to do culturally relevant pedagogy is to address Nancy Fraser's aspect of redressing political injustice by giving students more agency over what they want to read, over what they want to discuss in class, how they can recognize that their own personal experiences are relevant to the class, and how we can use their personal experiences to learn, all of us together, so that it's not all material that we're getting top down from books and articles and things like that, but sometimes their own knowledge becomes the topic that we learn from. So my students create their own games about their own personal experiences to spread awareness about causes they care about, that they've experienced. So that's how you bring in culturally relevant pedagogy. And culturally relevant pedagogy is good if you have a diverse classroom where you might have racism or you might have xenophobia. It's not going to address classism too much. It's not going to address ableism or neuronormativity. But then there are other kinds of pedagogy, like trauma-informed pedagogy. Now, trauma-informed pedagogy is to recognize that some of our students in our classrooms are coming in and they have been suffering not the regular stress that we have in and day out, but they have like deep-seated trauma that may be intergenerational, like Palestinians, for example, and also Jewish people have intergenerational trauma. And all of this affects someone's ability to learn and someone's ability to be completely rational and to manage their time and to finish their assignments and things like that. So how can we change the way we teach, knowing that these things are happening? And of course, during COVID, everybody was undergoing trauma from COVID itself, from the social isolation, from the fear of getting the illness, from family members and friends dying from COVID, right? So recognizing this and then thinking about, okay, the problem with online or remote learning during COVID wasn't just that people didn't know how to teach online. It was also partially that they didn't have social support, is that they were afraid of getting ill, is that they sometimes got ill themselves, and how that trauma affects all of us, but also who are the people who undergo more trauma than the rest of us because of ongoing issues. So people, African and Asian Americans in the US, especially Asian Americans during COVID, right? Because people thought it's coming from China, so they were not nice to Asian people. Palestinians all the time. everywhere, but obviously now more than usual. People who have pre-existing mental health challenges, anxiety or depression, I am sure during COVID, this was exacerbated, right? And we need to recognize this in order to know how are we as teachers going to support them. Now, the black peppercorns I said earlier are something that some people like and some people don't like. Like taste-wise, some people don't like them. And I think that every pedagogical strategy we try, it will help some people, but not all people. And sometimes it will make people who are more privileged uncomfortable because it will make them feel bad for their role in causing this injustice. So, for example, in Egypt, we have a majority Muslim country, but we have around 10% Christians. Now, there are different layers of systemic and interpersonal inequality in the relationship between Muslims and Christians in Egypt. And Muslims feel uncomfortable to recognize their role in that. And sometimes Christians don't want to talk about it because they don't feel comfortable expressing it. I assume Pakistan also has a similar kind of thing. And it's sometimes people are uncomfortable talking about these things, and sometimes you try to do something to help, and it can make other people feel uncomfortable. And it's always the important thing is to have multiple layers so that if something makes someone feel uncomfortable, there's another thing that helps them learn and helps recognize them and make them feel included. And also that the people who are made uncomfortable would be people who are more dominant, the more powerful. Don't make the less powerful people less comfortable. And people look at this, and this next one has all these different layers, one of them being universal design for learning. And I don't know if anybody has spoken about universal design for learning. This was originally made to enhance accessibility for people who have disabilities or have learning difficulties. So if you have students who are blind or deaf, or if you have students who have attention deficit disorder, who are on the autism spectrum, universal design for learning encourages you to make sure that every course that you create has multiple pathways for learning. So it would be like students don't have to always submit written assignments. Sometimes they can submit a podcast. Or when we explain things to students, we don't have to just explain by talking. Maybe we also show videos and imagery. And then also giving students some choice over what they want to learn and how they want to learn it. And that's what universal design for learning is for. And this helps with people who are different on the neurodiversity spectrum and people who have a disability, but it doesn't necessarily help with heteropatriarchy, for example. Then there
I thought, sorry for cutting you, I thought you forgot to change your slides. Should you not be changing your slides? Because we just see the cheese analogy right now.
Oh my God, I am changing my slides.
But we don't see.
Okay, let me share it again.
Yeah.
It's good that you told me. Can you see it? It's still cheese. It's just Roumy cheese now.
Yeah, it's cheese. That's it.
Yeah, it's a different one now?
No.
Yeah, it's still cheese. I'm still showing cheese.
Yeah.
I'm about to stop showing cheese.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, we're done with cheese now.
Yeah.
Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to click on the actual cheese analogy. Hang on. Did not mean to do this. See, now you got me doing the wrong thing. All right, here we are. Okay, no more cheese.
Okay.
All right. Now I'm going to talk about the equity care matrix, because in one of the topics that I told Rosanna I'm going to talk about is the equity care matrix. And this is a very important thing because a lot of times we talk about social justice and we don't talk about the connection with care. And so this is something I developed with Mia Zamora, who's a Filipino American. And we asked people on Twitter, what is equity without care and what is care without equity? And we came up with this matrix. There's a paper that we published, which is linked over here. And basically what we think happens is if you have no care and no equity, you have systemic injustice, right? On an institutional level. If you have equity in policies, but people don't care to implement them, you have contractual equity. It's written down, but people aren't implementing them. So for example, if you're in an institution where students who have a disability get accommodation letters and they give them to the professor, and the professor is required to sign that they will do these things, but the professor doesn't really care to make sure that the students get the accommodation. So they may follow the letter, but not the heart of what it means to accommodate a student. They might not change their class. They might not include this class, the student who is blind, for example, in group work. So this is problematic. The other situation And by the way, contractual equity, sometimes it's called performativity or diversity theater, where institutions do like an international day where everybody brings their own food, but you don't actually treat students from different cultures in a more respectful way on a daily basis. On the other side, if you have care but no equity, we're calling this partial care. It's partial because some people are giving care and others are not. So you're getting burnout and affected labor because only 10% of the faculty members in the department care when students are upset about something and they help them and they mentor them. And the other 90% aren't doing that. So it's not distributed. And also because few people are doing it, not all the students are receiving it. And it's partial because it's biased, because it's selective. You only support the ones you can see need it. Care is not the default, so only the one who cries gets the support, but the person who is suffering inside but not showing that they're upset gets the support. So this is not okay. And this causes burnout for faculty members, and it causes, if someone's going through trauma or stress, it makes it worse. So what we are advocating for, Mia and myself, is socially just care. And socially just care means everybody is responsible for caring for other people, and everybody is receiving the care that they need. But more importantly, that whoever is receiving the care gets the choice of how they want to be cared for. I think this is, if you have elderly parents or young children, this is where you get to see how sometimes you care about somebody very much, like you care about your elderly mother or you care about your young child, but sometimes you don't involve them in the decision-making of how they want to be cared for. So my mother-in-law, for example, when she's walking, she's not very stable, but she doesn't want you to hold her hand. So when you try to hold her hand, you mean well, you mean to support her, but this is not what she wants. She wants to be independent more than she wants to be stable while she's walking. And so you need to figure out how to support this person in a way that respects their needs. Same with young children. When they're first learning to walk and they want you to leave their hand so they can walk and you're afraid that they will fall. And you need to make these decisions about when is the right time to give them independence and to respect their desires for doing things. Not that they burn themselves, but that they can learn and give them space to do what they want. Okay, now thinking about our students, a lot of times we forget that our students are higher education students, they're almost adults. And we tend to believe what we think is good for them, like telling them don't use AI or use AI in this way, when maybe we could involve them in how do we make sure that in this classroom, the way AI is being used isn't unfair to some students versus others, and that what I do as an assessment seems fair in the first place so that you're capable of doing it without AI and things like that. Socially just care during COVID is also that all the faculty members are caring about the students and giving them flexibility when they're sick and things like that, versus every student having to ask for special help every time they have a problem. So think about examples from your own context. And I want you to think about what are the minority groups. I know not everybody's from the same country here. What are some of the minority groups you face in your classes? Give me an example. Thank you, Raja. I'm glad you're enjoying it. Yes, and I agree with someone, Shahzad, I think, saying equity may reduce their struggle to overcome challenges to evolve a stronger personality. Somebody said to repeat about systemic injustice, but I'm not sure. Systemic injustice is when there's no equity and there's no care. That's what I was saying. I don't know. I think usually somebody's talking about personality tests. I don't think it's about personality. Most inequities, of course, personality is part of it, but that's a small part of it. A lot of inequities relate to identity and relate to someone's history. So, for example, at AUC, we have students of different social classes. There are scholarships. It's a private university and it's expensive, but there are different social classes. There are also students who have very strong English and students who have weaker English. We have stereotype and bias, someone's saying. Students with diverse needs, yes. So especially diverse needs, especially if they're learning needs, if they have something. Yes, equity does reduce stress and depression in students. It should, because they feel like they're being cared. It's equity with care. Equity without care doesn't do that enough. Fisherman student or racism. I don't know what fisherman student means, but I assume you mean of a certain working class person. Biases in the classes, yes. And I was talking to somebody about this today, like some professors are just biased towards female students or against female students, for example. I'm a computer science graduate and I faced a lot of bias from male faculty members. Vacations related to minorities or given assessments during, yes, Christmas and Easter. Egypt used to have this and they stopped. They started to give Egyptian Christmas, which is January 7th. They give it off now. But they used to give exams on that day. That was horrible. Thank you for bringing that up. Linguistic barriers, big one. The different national ethnicities, of course. And usually the institution is oriented towards the dominant majority of ethnicities. Christian students would be rare in medical college here, yeah. From rural areas also would be minorities, definitely the same here. There are certain disciplines in Egypt that it's difficult for Christian students to do. Personalized academic advising would help, yes. Favoritism just for some students, yes. Neurodiversity for sure, religious and spiritual. Misogyny for sure, racism, yes. And some people get supportive supervisors and some don't, yeah. Yes, language, cultural barriers, yes. All right, thank you so much. And color and social differences and religious caste, thank you. All right, now I'm going to share very quickly. I want to finish in the next 10 minutes or so that I give Tom enough time and we have enough time for questions. So compassionate learning design model is one I co-developed with 2 educators based in South Africa. And as you can see, my collaborators are quite diverse. And in this compassionate learning design model, it addresses a lot of different dimensions, but the one I want to focus on is participatory design. So this builds on the aspect of political injustice that Nancy Fraser talks about, and it builds on what I was talking about earlier in sort of how do you do socially just care where the person who gets cared for is involved. And so you think about, this is based on the work of Nanwahi Pehana, who is from New Zealand. She is Maori, so she's an indigenous person from New Zealand, and we've adapted her model. Oh, this is really nice. Someone's talking in the chat about in art and design education and inclusive pedagogies to challenge dominant aesthetic standards and encourage diverse cultural expressions. And I think this would mean that you bring art from different, more indigenous and local groups and not just the dominant Western aesthetic standards, for example, and to accept very different kinds of art to do that. And part of it is to let students bring it in themselves. So what this model says is, in the beginning, even if we're empathetic towards, we want to move from empathy to compassion. So if the educator thinks they know what the students need and they give it to them, this is kind of like, I decide that AI is not good for you, therefore I will tell you, you will not use AI. But doing it for them is where maybe I have an idea that you may or may not want to use AI, and I give you a choice of which AI tool to use. So I've given you the choice of only 2 things to do, but you have a choice. It's not like me just imposing on you something. But another level is to do it with them, with the students. So if you do something with students, they have more agency and they're more recognized. This is when we have a discussion in our classroom with students to say, so what should our guidelines be in terms of AI for this class? Should we, you decide, we have a conversation, the students are here, the professor is here. These are the parameters of what the institutional guidelines are that we need to follow. But within this class, for this assignment, how can we set the AI guidelines given what the students know and their experiences with AI and things like that? Okay. And then another level is by. This is where you let the students decide on the AI guidelines on their own and you just approve them as the teacher. You're not interfering, but you still have to approve them. And then the highest level is if it was if they were the students and they were themselves deciding what they want to do and they don't even need our approval. Now in higher education, you can't do this. We have accreditation, the professor is the one who gives the grade. So it's never going to be fully agentic for the students. But can you develop a safe space, as someone was saying in the chat, so that students, when we're co-developing with them or by them, feel free to actually express what they want. So sometimes what you do, even if you want to do a with situation, give them a chance to talk amongst themselves before they come back and share with you what they want. And then you don't have to know which student said what if they don't feel safe letting you know. And then they have an opportunity to share anonymously or as a group. And the other thing is, even if we develop safe space from our side, there are still inequalities amongst the students, right? If you're doing this conversation about AI, some of your students are computer science. In my class, I have students from different disciplines. And so some of them are more tech savvy than others, so they know how to use AI better. Some of them, their English is better than others. And the ones whose English isn't good need to use AI sometimes to correct their grammar and things like that. And so we should recognize that just because we're letting students take more control and agency doesn't mean that in a group of students, there's no power and there's no inequality. If there's a student in your class, I once had to teach a class where I had 4 blind students. I had to make a lot of effort in the beginning of the class to make sure that all of the students are including the blind students in the discussions and not just talking amongst themselves and ignoring the blind students. And so after doing this for several sessions and making sure that other students are responsible for each other, because socially just care needs to be distributed amongst us. It's not just me as the teacher responsible for all the students, I am, but they're also responsible to support each other and creating a culture where we help each other and you get recognized when you help other people rather than a competitive environment where you need to get a better grade than someone else, or you need to give them a bad grade so that you can get a good grade, you know? And speaking of culture and cultural relevance, when I started talking about compassion on my blog, an educator from Australia, who's originally Yemeni and Muslim, talked about the compassionate rules. I was talking about compassionate rules in Islam, and she said this is compassion by design. So if you think about something like Muslim prayer, we think about religion usually as dogmatic and that you're required to do things. But when you think about Muslim prayer, there's a lot of agency that you have. So even though there is a time range for when you're allowed to pray each prayer, it's a soft deadline. You can pray as soon as the call for prayer comes, that's best. But you still have time until the next prayer. So you have autonomy over the specific time. And if you miss it, you can make it up. Now think about in education when we give students deadlines. And sometimes professors say, it's a hard deadline. If you don't submit it, I will not take it. And you're interrupting the person's ability to learn. So when my daughter was young and she was learning to pray, she used to get frustrated if she went out and she missed a prayer. But when she found out that she can make it up, of course, it's not ideal. But the fact that you can make it up makes you feel like, oh, maybe I can succeed eventually at praying all 5 prayers in a day because I gave you the time. With students who can't make the deadline, sure, we want to teach them to manage their time better. Time management is important. Punctuality is important. But sometimes somebody's father is in hospital and they can't finish the assignment on time. Or sometimes they just broke up with their girlfriend. Or sometimes they just didn't manage their time well this time. Now, they shouldn't be doing this all the time, but every now and then we need to be compassionate and have a softer approach to deadlines, in my opinion. The other thing is, in Islam, the number of prayers are fixed. The number of rak'at in each prayer is fixed. But the timing is different. The location, you can pray anywhere. We're not requiring people to pray in the mosque, right? That's not required. You can pray in the mosque, you can pray at home. You can pray in the car. You can pray alone or with others, right? You don't have to. So thinking about in class, sometimes there are some of my assignments where I allow them to do it alone or in a pair. You know, you can lead or follow. When I put students in groups, they don't have to be the leader of the group every time. Sometimes they can be a follower, right? In prayer, you get to choose which verses to say during prayer. You're not required, well, you're required to say the Fatiha, but everything else is optional. So in our classes, can we ask students to read half the readings are required for everyone, and then the other half, they have choices of which one to read, you know? And another thing about prayer is, yes, there's a fixed number of prayers, but when you're traveling, you do them 3 times and not 5 times. You do them shorter because God understands that you're traveling. So how does that apply to students? If we know that they're going through midterms, I can reduce the number of readings for this 2 weeks because I know everybody has midterms, right? Yes, exactly. You can adjust by deducting a few marks because, of course, in Islam, late prayer is not good, but it's better than missing it completely. And ablution, right? We have to wash up. But if there's no water available, there's another option, right? Tayammum. And think about students. If we require them to submit something on the computer and somebody has a problem with the computer, will be accepted handwritten, for example. And if someone is sick, also ablution, you can avoid the water if the water is going to be harmful for you, or if you're very old, things like that. And this element of facing qibla, which is very basic to what prayer is. But if you're in a moving vehicle, it's not a problem. If you don't know where the qibla is, you don't have anyone to ask, you can't see the sun, it's okay. And during war, people face different directions for safety. So all of these things that seem to be requirements are actually more flexible. And if you think about the anticipation of sickness, travel, having children, you know, if you're too sick, I'm thinking about fasting even more than praying. Is like, and you can pray while you're lying down if you're sick, right? You can pray standing or sitting or sleeping or lying down, right? With fasting, if you're too sick, you don't fast. If you're pregnant, you don't have to fast. If you're traveling, you don't have to fast. So all of these things are in Islam. So if you think about cultural relevance, and I'm trying to give like a culturally relevant Pedagogical development, faculty development, right? For educators, I think about your own culture. If you're a Muslim, these are all things that are in your religion already. And someone is talking about, yes, flexibility for deadlines during high stress periods, midterms, finals, and creating content that incorporates real world problems the students can relate to, for sure. And that comes back to, yeah, giving them choices about things that matter to them. Okay, I am going to skip over this part, intentionally equitable hospitality, but there is, if you go to the MyFest website, there's an upcoming series about how do you facilitate equitably. And okay, so it's called the IEH series, and you can email us for a free ticket. Okay, so you can find out the information if you go to the website, and you can get a free ticket for this. So I'm going to have to skip it just because I want to give Tom a lot more time to talk. And I just want to ask you very quickly, if you want me, I'll take 5 more minutes to, according to your choice, talk a little bit more about how to apply some of the things I've said to how do we build community online, or artificial intelligence, a little bit more talking about artificial intelligence, or are you equally interested? So I'm using SLIDO, which is a tool for polling. So I want you to vote on this. If you can see the QR code at the top, you can take it with your phone, or you can open a browser window and type in slido.com, and the code is 2983167. Slido.com, codes, what's the code again? It's 2983167. Okay. So if you could please vote on what you want to do for the next 5 minutes. Tom, will you be ready to go in about 5 minutes? I want to put you on the spot.
All good, all good.
All right, great.
For someone like me, it will take me 5 minutes to get to the Slido. So make a pass. Community building seems to be the response, right?
Okay, we have about, maybe this was an inequitable technology to use. I see not a lot of people are able to vote, but a lot of people are typing in the chat. So I'm seeing more community building in the chat than AI, some people saying both. And even the online voting is more towards community building. Okay, so we'll talk about community building because we talked about AI a little bit anyway, right? And Roxana, I did not address critical consciousness about AI yet.
Yeah.
So I will address Roxana's questions about AI, but I'll do the community building very quickly first. And then thank you all for voting and for saying in the chat when you can vote. That's also an alternative, like give people an alternative. If Slido's not working, we can talk in the chat, okay? So, but you'll have the slides. You can look at the rest of the things later. So this was the website that we created, Equity Unbound with 1HE. We developed this website during COVID. And it was, during COVID, people didn't know how to build community online, and it was so needed because this was a way to address inequality, because not everybody had a center for learning and teaching, so they didn't have people to help them, or their center was small and suddenly we had to support everybody in the world. And even in my department, we didn't have enough resources. So I got together with people from all over the world to give ideas for how can you build community in the class? How can you do introductions so that people get to know each other even though we're online? How can you do warm-up activities so that they get to feel like they're making friends with their colleagues and getting to know them and not just attending lectures? How can we set the tone so students know that we care about them? And all kinds of other things. And what we were doing was that we would create a video of us acting out this activity. And then we would give you the resources, the slides we used, any documents we used. And not only that, so we were helping the world, any faculty who don't have access to educational developers and any educational developers who ran out of ideas of things to give to their faculty members. But we were also giving alternative ways of doing the same thing. So we were giving some activities that use breakout rooms, and then we'd say, but if you don't have breakout rooms because you don't have Zoom at the time, here's another way you can do the activity. Or if you are doing the class asynchronously, here's another way you can do the activity. We had an activity where people were supposed to share show the video of where they are, but we said if your students can't open their camera because they're shy or their bandwidth isn't good, here's an alternative thing you can do. So it's all about giving agency to the person who's implementing and recognizing that we all come from different contexts and the same thing won't work for everyone. So some things related to listening to students and making sure that we respond to them are things like sending a pre-course survey before the class starts to understand some things about students so we can adapt some things in our classes, or encouraging students to look at your syllabus and put comments on it if there's something they don't understand, if there's something they want to add, if there's something they want to know more about. We have resources on how to do trauma-informed pedagogy. How do you do a welcome letter for your students so they understand what kind of person you are? I usually do a video. How do you encourage students to do gratitude journaling for their well-being, you know? So there's videos on all of this. Videos or materials. And then checking in on how people are feeling. And so this is an example, two examples of check-ins, you know, which one of these people on the tree do you represent? And which of these words do you represent? This one helps students express more than one emotion because students tend to feel like when I ask how you're feeling, then they're supposed to say I'm fine, but that's not what I mean. I want them to understand that, no, I really want to know. The other aspect is also to think about this blob tree one, where which one of these are you? Is if you have students who are visually impaired, you need to remember to adapt so that people don't say, I feel like number 9 or I feel like number 7. They'll have to say, I feel like number 9 who has their hands out and they're looking confident because I feel confident today. Or I feel like number 16 who's falling from a tree because I can't catch up with all my midterms and my deadlines and I feel like I'm falling. You know what I mean? So how do you adapt things so that the way you're doing something is equitable and reaches all of your students almost equally? All right, I'm going to stop here because I'm just going to share this very quickly. So in terms of warm-up activities, I'm showing two different ones. Wilder Mat-T has students in pairs, like speed networking. And it's a very energizing activity. It's very nice to do in person, very nice to do with breakout rooms online. And Spiral Journal is a very reflective activity where we're quiet and we put our hands on paper and pen and we don't talk for like 5 or 10 minutes as we do the activity. And it's important to mix up the warm-ups so that some of them are energizing and quick and fast and high energy, which work very well for extroverted people. And things that are more reflective, that work for people who need a little bit more time and they want to think on their own. So you need to have a combination of both. You want to have that energy in your class, but you also don't want to overwhelm students who are overwhelmed by very fast things and too much talking and noise and all of them. So I'm going to stop talking about these things now. And in terms of AI, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a second. In terms of AI and critical consciousness, so critical consciousness is a term that comes from Paulo Freire, who is the person who wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and he talks about the importance of a person becoming aware of oppression and injustice around them in such a way that you're aware of the injustices that you face. So someone was talking to me recently, and we were talking about gender oppression in Egypt. And she said, what if someone's happy with it? I'm like, yeah, but they've internalized their oppression. It's not really that they're happy with it. They don't know that they're being oppressed. You need to become aware of this kind of oppression. And so I think with AI, it's important to, I didn't turn on the whiteboard, did I? Somebody turned on the whiteboard by mistake. Anyway, with AI, critical consciousness about AI, for those of us, especially from the global south, is to be, I have no idea who's doing this, is to be aware of the kinds of power and biases and inequalities that AI reproduces or exacerbates. And so if I, as a person from this part of the world who's not a native speaker of English, continually use AI to help me improve my accent or to improve my writing, I'm internalizing my own oppression as a person who is a non-native speaker of English and believing in native speakerism, that English only exists by the native speakers and that it's not okay to be the way I am. If we continue to use AI to produce knowledge, we're reproducing what's already the dominant knowledge. But what happens when it comes from AI is that we think it's neutral and it's not coming from a particular person. So we need to question that. We need to question the kinds of biases that AI reproduces, the kind of power it empowers certain groups and disempowers other groups. This is not enough to explain what I want to say about AI, but this is like just the critical consciousness of all the wrong that can come from AI and from using it in ways that can be harmful. And just, I want to ask people in the chat before I hand over to Tom, what's one thing you're taking away from this conversation so far? What's something that stood out for you that you think you could maybe use in your classes or something? And I'm going to stop sharing the screen and hand over to Tom, but thank you
Yeah.
oh, Tom likes the Swiss cheese model. Well, it's called the Roumy cheese now. Mine is the
Yeah.
Roumy cheese.
Sorry, my mistake.
Yeah. No, but Maha, I think the points that you made about how diversity and how to counter it, and you gave so many practical strategies for it, that while many will take away all those links and work with those and sort of, I hope, keep on practicing till they find their own comfort zone with whatever activity suits them best. I think going on to Tom, you'll introduce yourself, which I see you will in your slides. And I think you're going to translate of all that Maha has said, and a lot of it, into how you get students to engage, applying different strategies. Perhaps that Maha taught or some different ones.
Absolutely.
Good to, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your introductions, please, and thank you everyone for coming along to this webinar today. So I'm going to hopefully build on lots of the thinking across this week to talk about the challenging context that we now find ourselves in, which is being an academic and student engagement in higher education. So just to let you know, I'm presenting from one screen and I've got the chat open on the right-hand side. So please do comment along as we go. All the discussion activities I'll use in this short session will be using the chat function. So please do post your thoughts as we go through too. So thank you so much, everyone. So I'm going to be talking this whole idea of student engagement, and I'll be thinking both from a teacher context, but also from the wider university as well in regards to how we work. So I spent a lot of time in my higher education career developing staff. I spent time visiting universities, opening learning and teaching days, and talking about this complex topic of student engagement. And what I want to start off with saying that this is a really tough gig we have. This is a really difficult context that we are in higher education. Perhaps there were societal stereotypes in the past that being a lecturer or working in a university was easy, that it was like you could just sit around, listen to ideas, read ideas, and you have an easy job. Actually, in the UK sector, but I know around the world, the elements of tuition fees, the changing balances in regards to how people wish to engage, moving towards digital elements, seeing less students turning up in person, and the long-term impact of the pandemic has made being a lecturer and trying to engage students a very, very challenging context. So just before we get started, I'd love to know who we have in the room. So I think you've all answered question one already, but if you could just say what university you work at and what your job is. So I'm Westminster and I am a principal lecturer. I would really like to get an idea of who we have in the room. Do we have managers? Do we have lecturers? Do we have professional service providers? Who have we got in the room? Please just use the chat to type in who you are. Thank you so much, Sanya. Thank you so much, everybody. Okay, wow, we have over 300 people on the call, so we're going to get a lot of responses. Quality officer, welcome. Faculty member, lecturers. Okay, this is really good. So the majority of people here are involved in teaching students and supporting student engagement, but also it looks like we've got some managers as well and some researchers and a student as well. So Afsania, I just saw your name there, so welcome too. My name's Tom Lowe and I work as an assistant head of school in student experience in the School of Finance and Accounting at the University of Westminster. We are a university that offers opportunities for education to students from non-traditional backgrounds. This basically means students whose parents didn't go to university or whose societal demographic would dictate that they are maybe less likely to go to university. I've been researching the topic of student engagement for around 12 years, and also in topics like embedding employability into the curriculum. I've worked at many universities, and I'll share links at the end to the RAISE network, which I chair, similar to this network, which is a network for all people internationally interested in the topic of student engagement. I've also researched a few times. Here's one of my books on student engagement on the right-hand side, and there's links available at the end. Across this presentation, I'll share lots of ideas, lots of thoughts. Some of those may really work in your context. Some of them you may think, it's not like that here. That's completely fine. My main endorsement in student engagement, and we're looking to engage people in something, is to get talking about it, to share ideas, and to have a really good debate. And I think in our current world right now, we need to do more debating and more discussion about how we can make things better. Please also add me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn is here. It'd be great to connect with you after today. So I'm working in UK higher education, and in particular, I'm working in English higher education. English higher education is a very pressured sector. So if you look around the world, every university would say we care about student engagement. However, those universities that are under pressure in relation to things like tuition fees, money, government accountability, the press, students, parents, force us to think more about student engagement. And in our context, we have a big financial pressure. We are a tuition fee charging sector. And what's interesting, although we are a tuition fee charging sector, students are still coming in huge numbers. Even our own government has questioned what's the value of going to university. And what is very interesting is that students still come. Actually, in 2019, 50% of 18-year-olds progressed onto university education in England, even though there's a big tuition fee with attending English universities. But when they come, they're expecting all of these things on screen. Fantastic experience, maybe some form of graduate outcome. And we have a big duty to support our students to succeed while they're with us. We even have a sector regulator called the Office for Students, which asks us to ensure that whoever our students are, no matter their demographic, that they are supported to get into, that's access, succeed during, that's pass, and then progress from into graduate level employment. And we will get fined as universities if we don't achieve government targets, which is a really interesting sector to be in. But whenever we're trying to improve student outcomes, whether we're looking to improve student learning, students' grades, student attendance, student employability, even just students talking in our class, the conversation often comes back to this wide topic of student engagement. Why is that? Well, we've perhaps seen that throughout our career as learners and teachers, that if the students are engaged, they do better, or the groups of students that were more engaged than the others did better. And there's lots of research that highlights that. The second text down highlights that some seminal readings in my research area where students were more engaged, they did better. And the last point there, some more recent readings, and the references will be shared at the end, everybody, of students, when they're engaged, they do better in their education. And we can define student engagement in loads of ways. We're going to come on to this in a moment. Broadly, it's the time students put in and what we put in return. So I'd love to ask you all, how do you define student engagement, or what is important to you in student engagement? And I'd ask you all to write this down, take a moment to think about it, and then post it in the chat. What type of student engagement do you think is important? So have some time to think about it alone. If I was doing this in the room, I'd ask you to write it down.
Trying to clarify, what you're trying to say is that alone first means that you think about it on your
Yes.
own, or are you wanting us to? Okay, so
Yes.
think
I could
about it.
see. I'm
Yeah, the
sorry. Yes.
confusion. Yeah. Remember, we might be speaking the same language. The diversity is how you interpret those words, and that can
Absolutely.
create a confusion itself. So what you mean to say is that think about it and then write your answer in the chat. That's what you meant, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So everybody, if I could just ask you, let me just do some changing.
Yeah. Think about it and write.
I'm sorry, everybody.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Good learning for me there too. I've reworded the question, everybody here.
Awesome.
So what type of student engagement is important to you? What do you want your students to engage in?
Yeah.
Okay, more responses.
Yeah, they're more
Thank you, Chief.
responsive.
Okay, thank you. Good. Thank you, Rabia. Thank you so much. Collaborative engagement. Thank you, Adib. Thank you, Maha. Okay, Grant, lots of important things. I want to say that all of those are really important definitions of student engagement and things that we value as important. Student engagement is a term we use so much in higher education. It means lots of different things. It's interpreted in different ways. If we look at the term quite traditionally, it can mean things like paying attention in class, listening. I want to pause on these two. These are both open to our bias, where maybe we think a student's paying attention, but they're not, or they are actively or not. Interacting in discussions, becoming involved, taking notes, asking questions. It can be all sorts of activities. In a higher education sector, we are perhaps a bit student engagement crazy, and we talk about student engagement all the time. And we think student engagement means things like students answering surveys, students accessing the virtual learning environment, students attending, student success, student voice, belonging, employability. All these other things also take the banner of student engagement, making it very confusing. So I want to give you a framework now to end the kind of first quarter of this talk, to talk about the different ways we can talk about student engagement. Starting on the left, we can talk about student engagement in regards to emotions. This is how our students feel, whether they are happy, whether they are sad, whether they are satisfied, whether they're dissatisfied, whether they feel accepted, like they belong, or they feel alienated and that they don't belong. These are all feelings that our students have. The second is cognitive engagement. This is how students are learning. All the words we see in our learning outcomes. We do measure this through assessment, but we also measure this formatively through discussions in class. Then finally, the third area of student engagement is behavioral. Behavioral engagement aligns to what students do. That could be attendance, that could be logging on, that could be downloading something, it could be reading, it could be all sorts of activities. I've added a fourth area here, which is engaging our students and improving the modern university. This could be working with our students as partners. This could be listening to our students' stories. And what Rehanna's said here is absolutely important. If you want to improve student engagement, focusing on all of them are really important. There's not one that's more important than another. I'm going to come on to in a moment talking about student attendance, something we're very obsessed with in Europe. And whether that's an indicator of student engagement. So I think we could define student engagement in any way we want. We may say, let's have a conversation about student engagement, but what we mean is we want to have a conversation about student attendance. We may say, let's have a conversation about student engagement, but what we mean is let's have a conversation about how students are learning the content. We might be wanting to have a conversation about student engagement, but we mean let's talk about employability and confidence. I think what's really important is we be clear from the start. So it doesn't matter what we're talking about in student engagement, as long as we say at the start, we're going to have a conversation about student engagement in regards to attendance, or in regards to learning, or in regards to engaging in discussions. We won't go far wrong. But I also think we should recognize that we all have our own positionality, or perhaps preferences or bias towards certain ways to engage in the university. And I'm going to talk about the wider society in a moment and how those engagement practices are washing up at the modern university. I think we all have gone on our own university journey. This is my university journey, based on how the decades that I were alive in and the different kind of engagements I saw in society. The way I engage with the information, with my friends, with social media content, with online information. It has changed over the last few decades. Some of you on the call will be in your 30s, some in your 40s, 50s, and beyond. We all had a journey of engagement through society and through the university. And what is important to say is this is changing. I think in a modern university, where we're in a digital age of phones and technology, that we are kind of wanting to go back to earlier forms of engagement, engagement that we're nostalgic for. Engagement like teamwork, synthesis, talking, debating, are students being in the room and not engaging in technology. These are perhaps the types of student engagement that I have nostalgia for and that I think are really important. At this stage, it's really important to think that student engagement, and to remember that student engagement goes both ways. That it's about students engaging staff and staff engaging students, meeting in a middle ground. And also that post-pandemic, we've perhaps lost a lot of those student engagement activities that we relied upon or perhaps even took for granted in the past. These are the rich discussions in the curriculum, making friends opportunities, socials, residential living, sports teams, societies, and trips. All of these things gave a lot of that rich engagement experience that gave our students a really high sense of belonging. But I don't know about your institutions, but if students are now choosing to engage more online or from distance or commuting, this will mean that less and less students are getting that rich sense of engagement. So I'm now going to go on to talk about how student engagement has changed. And in particular, I'm going to think about this in the last 5 years. And I want to start this story off by talking about the COVID-19 pandemic, where here's a photo of me working at the University of Winchester at the time. We had the university was turned on its head. The original university was based on in-person engagement, presenteeism, our students being in the class and our staff being on campus. What happened after this time was we experienced online learning. We exposed a whole generation to online learning and assessment, but also we saw our students engaging in a different way. Perhaps they were excited to return to campus, perhaps they were scared, perhaps they liked learning online and now they wanted to engage differently. So I'd like to ask the question now, at our universities, we are seeing student attendance in person decreasing. And I would like to ask the question, why do you think students are attending less post-COVID-19? Why do you think students are coming to the campus less? And feel free, there's no right or wrong answer. Thank you, Tayaba. Thank you, Harpur. Thank you, Alina. Thank you. Thank you, Durmu. Yes, thank you. Keep them coming in. I think you're probably seeing less of this at your universities. I don't know. It depends on lots of different structures and it is different nation by nation. But we conducted some research on this topic in 2022, 24 to ask why might this be? And these slides I'm showing now are student stories, and I'll let you read this one right now. So students, maybe we as lecturers had a real love of learning. We were interested in our courses, but sometimes our students haven't necessarily got that same interest level. And as soon as we've shown that you can learn online, that you can pass online, that perhaps students were engaging differently. What I say to colleagues, if they've got less students turning up to their classes, if they've got less students coming along, I say to them, you need to talk about it. We need to share this. We need to look at these puzzles that are going on. This isn't just something that's happening in your class. This isn't just something that's happening at your university. This is going on all over the wider world. The research on screen shows first that students' numbers and attendance is decreasing during post-pandemic, but also the cost of living crisis is caused by inflation, whether that's due to global conflict, post-COVID recovery. Students maybe have got less money in their pocket, and what's seeing is students are just working through and struggling with attendance. And we've particularly seen this for our students in the UK. The results on screen show this very clearly from this large study that took place, showing that students considering dropping out, not attending, and choosing to work as opposed to going to university. And we found this in our research too. We found students were turning up to class less and not engaging as much in their study. There's lots of reasons why. If you had a class of 100 students and 50 students didn't come along, there's lots of reasons why they might not have attended. And perhaps the reasons on this 1,600 student study are highlighted here. There's lots of reasons why students might not attend. And as a university lecturer, most of you on the call will think, well, I can't do anything about all of these. But I would argue the ones in the yellow, we could probably do something about through course planning, through looking at ensuring that we don't clash or compete with ourselves. But also, I would say every 6 months to begin to question, okay, we've moved a lot of stuff online during the pandemic. Is it right to keep it online now? I think the accessibility debate and the convenience debate are quite close, and we've got to have a look at that. We've also got to look at our teaching, and I'm not saying that lecturers should become entertainers, but I think we've got to be worthwhile. Is it worthwhile a student traveling across their city to come to your class if it's going to be filmed? And we heard students saying, well, we go to some classes because they're really interesting. The lecturer is very interesting, lots of stories. Others are saying, well, Tom just reads from his slides, so I can read from his slides at home. Thank you very much. And we had this in our study. We also did have lazy students, or perhaps students that had got into poor habits. Weeks had gone by, and they perhaps felt like they weren't engaging enough. So that's a bit more about why students aren't attending, but there's more to it. There's wider things going on in society. And I want to ask you now, what is changing in the way we engage with wider society? Can I ask you all, what do you think is changing outside? Thank you, Professor Zardi. Any more? What is changing? How are we engaging with our bank? How are we engaging with our hospital? How are we engaging with Netflix? How are we engaging with food? Thank you, Roxana. Yes, capital letters needed, Nida. Yeah, really good. I think what I want to highlight here is the way we engage with other things washes up at the university. We so often think about universities in a silo. Why aren't my students attending in the same way? Why aren't they engaging in the same way? Well, look at how they're engaging with other things in society. Students are going out for people, humans, we're like this too, by the way, are going out for dinner less. We are seeing people go to work less. They're seeing friends less. They're sending voice notes rather than sending texts. They're not calling each other. Less and less social interaction going on. And all of this is going to wash up at the modern university. Every day we are being trained in a capitalist world to see how can we do things faster, how can we do things cheaper, and how can we do them with greater convenience. And by that convenience, we often mean how can we do two things at the same time, or how can we do things without leaving our house. And the workplace is a great comparison, everybody. We are all guilty of this. But we are engaging Generation Z. These are students who were born in 1996 onwards. These students are technology native. Your current first years were born around 2006, after YouTube, actually. And the digital reality of the online world is sometimes more important than the in-person world. There is strengths and cons to the online ability. I can talk to you now. I'm sat at a conference in Berlin, no problem. It's wonderful to be connected with you all. It's a great strength. The limitations are we are bombarded with news. We are, in a sense, more connected but more divided than ever. And in a sense, even though our students are quite good with technology, if it goes wrong, they're not so good. And I want to come back to Netflix, the generation of streaming. And we are all guilty. I've used Generation Z, but we are all part of this. We're used to fast content, fast information, reels, TikTok, watching highly addictive box sets again and again and again and again. Our attention spans are perhaps decreasing, or our taste for high impact content is growing. So when a student goes to a lecture, they find it harder to engage. When we go to conferences, we find it harder to engage. And this is the context we are in. And the relationship with knowledge is changing too. When I was a student, if I wanted knowledge, I go to the library, I go to the lecture. Now you want any knowledge in the world, you go to your phone. And we are reading information at pace. We are not necessarily being as critical. And with AI, you have the knowledge, you have the assignment. It can even bypass the critical mind. So I think universities need to ask some tough questions. We made choices in the pandemic to survive. We made choices in the pandemic to return. But where are we going now as a world? I was in a university in America where 100 students were crossing a block and no one was talking. Everyone was looking at their phones. I think we talk about data access, but we actually need to be talking about knowledge access. I think we need to worry about how we could have a future where we don't leave our house, like in the Bruce Willis film, Surrogates. So colleagues, what do we do about it? It's not all doom and gloom. What can we do about this? Well, I would say it's really important for us to focus on engaging students. I'm going to share some recommendations now for the final 20 minutes or so. One is in regards to the 3 R's of engaging students. This is from secondary schools in America, saying if we want to engage students, we should have positive relationships. And there's a whole book on this by Peter Felton and on the topic of we should have good relationships between students and students, students and staff, staff and staff, and staff and managers. We need to have rigor. We need well-designed courses that manage students' expectations consistently, not eclectic buffets that don't make sense. And importantly, relevance, highly relevant teaching. We don't need to be entertainers, but we do need to be teachers worth coming in for. And if our sessions aren't worth coming along for, we need to look at ourselves, I think. There's little things we can do in the class. For example, 1 activity per session, rather than just lecturing for an hour straight. Changing the medium every 20 minutes, maybe a video, an artifact, an activity. Private writing, pair and share, so that's talking to your neighbor, having accessible discussions, and getting out from behind our lectern and being a human being. When we're looking online, avoiding having chaotic virtual learning environment spaces, having readings, not reading from the slide as a lecturer, having assessments that relate to more than 1 week's class. Sometimes the deadline only relates to 1 week. There's 10 weeks of learning. The deadline relates to week 7. Students will go to week 7 and ignore the rest. Overworking students with prep work and poor teaching. If we do poor teaching, then it's going to impact. And just to say, my book is available online. It's available on Amazon, on Routledge as well. You can find it easily on Amazon. I think we've also got to kind of take in what Marley has already talked about, is mattering and community best practice. Knowing our students by name, it's so easy as a solution, but hard to do in reality. We've all met those colleagues who only have 20 students and they say, I know them all by name. And you're like, yeah, I got 200. Understanding the wider student journey, auditing student communications. How are we talking to them? Turning up a little bit early and leaving it late, or having a bit of informality at either end of your class. Positive relationships and recognizing your students have different needs for belonging. And I've talked about rich engagements already, but what's really important is that we don't forget this stuff that's really important for higher education. I think universities, we think about our university experience as amazing, but I think university experiences are changing considerably. And finally, I'll make a few points before we go to Q&A. We've got to talk to the people who are living it. And by this, talk to students. There's a lot in our universities which is about, well, when I was a student, it was like this, so we should do this. If you weren't a student during the pandemic or since, you don't know what it's like to be a student. Because this is what it's like to be a student today. A student will get emails from their course, from their faculty, and from all the classes they're taking. A student will get emails from the union, the library, the student services, and the careers services. A student will get emails from university, from their fellow students, from social media, and all the websites they're logged onto, let alone all the takeaways and things they're signed up to. Our students are besieged with information, and then we ask why they don't engage. We try to plan our journeys, and if we're planning one area of activities, we might be like this. But in reality, our student journeys look like this. They're chaotic, they're full of chaos, and this is from when I audited a university student journey. We often think students aren't engaging in my one thing, but actually students have so much going on in a very noisy world. So to draw the lines in student engagement, what do I think? I think we have to look at from beyond the university, and we need to look at how people are engaging in wider society, and then questioning, well, what are we doing as a university? I think we should focus on perceived relevance. So is it relevant to students what we're doing? And belonging. I think we should understand where our students come from, what they've been through. And we're probably going to have big conversations about what is mandatory in person and what is flexible online. There's not going any going back to the old normal, everybody. I think we've got this for good now. Continuous change, and we'll see what happens in the year ahead. So we're coming now to my end. I'm going to share some links in the chat, and I'll share a link to my book because I've seen I had a few questions. But please, I'll share a link to the RAISE network as well. This is a network I run. It's free to join. It's a network for people interested in student engagement. And I will share my slides following the session to the mailing list so you can all engage. Thank you so much for your participation and good chat along as we go.
I have written in the chat if there are any questions. Fatima, I did see some, so let's go to the questions straight away. And Tom, very quick, very effective timelines. So Fatima, questions, please.
We have questions for both Maha and Tom. Sadaf Bashir has asked, how can student voices contribute to equitable and trauma-informed educational spaces?
So I can start, and Tom can say if he has ideas as well. So first of all, when we talk about trauma-informed spaces, I think most of us aren't really trained on how to deal with this, right? And we're not therapists, so we shouldn't be the ones who support a student who's suicidal, for example. We should have counseling center or something like that, hopefully in our institutions where we can refer students. But for the ongoing things, I think what we can do is we can involve students in the decision-making of how do we make our class less stressful for you so that it doesn't exacerbate any trauma. And they can tell us how is the way they're feeling right now because of what's happening in the world. They first of all bring into your class what's happening in the world that might be affecting students, all of them, and also assume that some of your students may be undergoing trauma that is personal, like domestic abuse or something like that they're not talking about. And you ask them how they prefer to be treated in this case. So I'll give an example. During COVID, I was teaching a graduate class, and that we were trying to decide on a deadline for something. And my co-teacher and I realized there was a problem between the deadline for the Christian Easter vacation and the Muslim Eid vacation. They were close to each other. And so whichever deadline you chose would be uncomfortable for someone. So we said, we're going to give you a hard deadline, which is after both of these religious holidays, but we're going to give you a soft deadline that's a little bit earlier. If you want to manage your time and you can submit early, that's good, but you won't be penalized if you submit later. And what was happening in this situation is that some of the students said, this makes me uncomfortable, give me a hard deadline. And so for the students who were really uncomfortable with this, we just said which deadline is better for you. That's your hard deadline. Like they were even struggling with just making the choice. You know what I mean? Also things like I'm always trying to build community in my class, and I want students to work with others that are not their friends. And I realized that some of my students who are extremely shy or socially anxious don't feel comfortable doing that. So I try to make them work in groups of 3 to 4 instead of 2. So that they can have their friend with them and also 1 or 2 new people. So this is, for example, something I got from feedback from my students that they asked for this. And so trying to find a way, like find out what is the thing that makes them uncomfortable, what makes it difficult, and then work to help them with that. And I get feedback from my students every 1 or 2 classes on what they're enjoying and what they like and what's not working for them. And based on their feedback, I bring it back to the class and I say, some of you gave this feedback. What would you like to do about it? Would you like to do this or this? And let them choose. I think Tom might have something to say, so I'll give him time in case he wants to.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So I'm not an expert in trauma-informed pedagogies, and I think Maha's work has been fantastic in terms of giving us lots of recommendations to draw on here. What is really important is I call it topping up our empathy. So taking time to understand the current lived experience. And that's it can be as small as having 5 minutes of informality before class. What's important in that is we don't speak to the same students each week. Make sure we swap who we speak to. We can ask for students' feedback. I really recommend the activity, doing a feedback activity in week 1 and asking students simply on flip chart paper or on Padlet, what are their ideas, what are their concerns, and what are their expectations of the course ahead on 3 different pages: ideas, concerns, and expectations. And this is what medical doctors do, but asking them what their ideas of the course, what are their expectations, and what are their concerns. It's so empowering having that in week 1. because then you can adapt. The concerns is really powerful because you get to hear what they're scared about and you can put support mechanisms in right away. But also you can understand what they're kind of thinking. Sometimes it's a bit different to what you were thinking, and you can adapt as well and add some things. If they said, oh, we really want to learn about this and you haven't planned to do it, you can do something about it. But also you can manage expectations. I think also having some form of student representative is a good thing. So having a class rep or a student rep who you can talk to about how the course is going. And sometimes we think, oh, am I kind of going to say my course isn't perfect? And you're not saying that at all, actually. What you are saying is, I'm trying to do my best for you. And I think, say the world is changing and we want to make sure that we give the very best education. And I always use, when you've got something like COVID as an excuse, you can say, well, since the pandemic, we're trying to make education better. So we want to hear your views. So it's quite a soft thing of saying, yes, I like it.
Building on this discussion, we have another question from Mujahid Ali as to how teachers can support students experiencing trauma or stress without overstepping professional boundaries.
John, would you like to go first with that?
I think we know we never really have an idea how students are doing until we talk with them. So making real time to speak with students. Your university may have a personal tutoring scheme and it may not, but it starts with asking students how they're getting on and having a list of questions that you can share with colleagues that can begin that conversation. But then sometimes colleagues may be a bit worried about things overstepping your boundaries. And by boundaries in terms of if you go into kind of a big mental health talk or a traumatic conversation in terms of where students are sharing trauma. Now, sometimes students will share trauma with you and you weren't expecting it, and you must just listen and hear them. Emotions never lie is something I say. If you feel it, you feel it. That's truth, okay? Even if it's a worry about an assessment. But then ensuring you're well signposted to professional services at your university, if you have wellbeing advisors or managers, and asking for trainings for it. So if you feel ill-equipped as a staff member to support your students, ask for more support and trainings. I'm sure your service will be quite happy to help. Yes. Maha, I don't know what you think.
Yeah, so I actually have 3 different directions to take here. There are 3 directions. One is anticipatory compassion. So like I was talking about prayer already anticipates that some people won't be able to do it on time, that some people will be traveling. And so sometimes the students won't want to tell you what's going on with them. And it's important to make sure that we have some kind of flexibility baked into our course in the first place. So the students don't always have to disclose something to us that they don't want to disclose. So flexible deadlines is one thing. There's other people, I learned this from the University of Toronto, where they have something called Life Happens. They say you can get an extension on one assignment in the whole semester without having to tell me why, but you have only one chance to do this, and you just tell me life happens, I'll give you a week extension. That's it, no questions asked. So the students don't have to keep revealing things about themselves that are an emotional burden for us. By the way, if I have to hear from every student who's going through something, I'm happy to listen to someone who wants to talk, but sometimes they don't want to, and sometimes they lie because they have something else going on that they don't think you're going to appreciate. So the first thing is anticipatory. The second thing is, yes, having your door open, having a classroom where students themselves support each other means that when a student is struggling with something, if they don't have a tutor program like what Tom was saying, they can go to another friend from the class and so on, and definitely make sure that they know about psychology services on your campus and know when to refer them. The third thing, though, is sometimes there's something happening outside of your control that's causing trauma. And I have 2 examples of these. One time there was, not this time around, but like in 2009 or 10, something was happening in Palestine. And I had 2 Palestinian students in my class, and I asked them before if we could talk about it in class, and they agreed and they wanted to. And then one of them, when we started talking about it, she got triggered. And this is an important thing when you're talking about sensitive things. Someone could get triggered, whether or not they are aware that this could trigger them. And she started crying, and I felt like that was a really bad situation. But strangely enough, because the classroom was such a safe environment, and all her friends and people in the class who weren't close friends of hers supported her, in the end, she told me, I wasn't upset that I cried. I feel safe in this class. And I felt supported, even though I cried. I'm still happy that I was able to express this. Like sometimes we think crying is a bad thing, but she was happy that she expressed it. The other situation that happened recently in my institution is there was a suicide attempt on campus. And this is something that some students may have witnessed, some people may be this person's friend, some people may not have known about. And it was one of those things where when it came up in my class, we started talking about how it made them feel. And it's difficult to ignore something like that when it happens either on the media or in your own university. One time something like this happened, and I called someone from our psychology, they're called we call them Student Wellbeing Center. I called her and I told her, should I bring this up or should I not? And she said, if students want to bring it up, you let them talk about it. It's such a taboo subject that they really need to talk sometimes, but also try to tie it to the topic of your class. So at the time I was teaching a digital literacy class, so I talked about whether we share things about this on social media and if it can trigger people and how should we be careful not to overshare things like that so people don't get harmed. I hope that helps answer the question.
Yeah, next one.
Our next question is from Tayyeba Maqsood and Ghulam Jafar, asking how can we make room for diverse students in keeping with their emotional well-being, and how can educators incorporate transformative learning theories to create more equitable learning environments in diverse classrooms?
I think
Yes,
your talk was all about those frameworks that work in diverse settings, and you talked about universal design for learning. I think a lot of what you're saying is encompassed by universal design for learning, which was shared actually yesterday by one of the speakers. But Tom, please go ahead.
Yes, I think every step we make, so if you just say, for example, you had one group of students in your room, let's say in a UK context where in some education providers you have a minority of Muslim students, and so you may have a class of 100 and only 7 of the Islamic faith. If you take steps to make the class more accessible for them during Ramadan, you're actually going to be inadvertently making the class more accessible for the whole room. So every time you do one thing for a small group of students, it's actually making the entirety more accessible. And so I think when you ask such a question like that, and you go, oh, well, how can I make my session accessible to all? We all become intimidated. It's not something we spend an afternoon doing to our slides and it's done. We will make small changes every single year, and across our career, we as educators and our curriculum will become more and more accessible, more sensitive, more respectful, and the opportunities will have more equity built in. I think the important thing is to keep being reflective of what we are doing, what's working and what might not be working, and keep speaking to students and gaining an understanding of what is preventing greater access. So I haven't got a direct answer. There's not one thing. There isn't one. There'll be a different thing for a different student at a different time for a different activity. And the work is never done. Maha, what do you think?
Everything you said, Tom, 100%. The one thing I didn't share with you guys the intentionally equitable hospitality model, but I said you could take a whole workshop series on this. For me, there's the way you facilitate a class and the way you design it, but there's also the way you pre-design. And what Tom was talking about here, which is constantly listening to students, pre-design is about whose thinking you keep in mind as you design your courses. Are you able to involve current or past students in the development of your classes? Are you able to talk to people who are different from you? So for example, in Tom's institution, someone who is actually Egyptian called Fatima is a Muslim. And so if someone has a lot of Muslim students, not a majority, but a lot of Muslim students, they can actually talk to the other Muslim staff member or faculty member in their institution and tell them what would be useful to do during Ramadan to make sure the class is accessible for students. You can talk to the actual students, of course, depending on your kind of relationship with them. The other thing also is just us in our preparation for our classrooms. Do we only read texts about Western pedagogy, or do we also read diverse texts from people of color and women and people from the global South? Because their perspectives on pedagogy are quite different. So, for example, someone like Bell Hooks is an African-American educator, and her writing about critical pedagogy is quite different than the male scholars who write. So they're all writing about social justice, but her work integrates elements of care and vulnerability much more than the males, and her work is much more pragmatic and applicable, and you know how to apply it. So it's important to expose ourselves the different things. And as Tom was saying, add new layers. So if you think about the Roumy cheese analogy, and maybe you're someone who's been well trained in universal design for learning, maybe next year you want to learn about trauma-informed pedagogy and find a free online course about that. And then the next year you realize, there's a lot of, we have a lot of students who have this particular issue that I need to educate myself about this particular issue. And you just keep building your arsenal of different things you can do for students. And then one semester I had one blind student, one semester I had 4. I was better prepared when I had the 4, but I still had to adapt to these particular 4 people because they're not identical to the one I had before. So we learn and we grow. And the important thing is to be willing to adapt. And like Tom says, to know that it's an ongoing thing and there will always be things we don't expect and can't predict and can't design for. And to be willing to change in the moment and just to have that attitude of, I want to make sure that my class is accessible to everybody. And you do your best wherever you can and get feedback on whether it's working. And to also question if there's something in your institutional structures that makes it difficult for you to apply this, you need to talk to someone and try to change those institutional structures. So for example, our university tells us that certain students have an accommodation and should be able to submit their assignments a week late. But we as professors have to submit the grades on a certain deadline. And we don't have the accommodation to submit our grades late. So how do you solve that problem?
That's true. So there is that, tension over there with deadlines and not deadlines. Next question, Fatima.
I believe you may have answered this question, but this question is for both of you from Khalid Mahmood. How can assessment methods in art and design education be made more reflective of holistic learning valuing not just the final product, but also the emotional, conceptual, and developmental journey of the student?
Would you like to go
I think
first?
I did sort of answer it.
Yeah.
I think I did sort of answer it. I think the other element is that student might have internalized the dominant aesthetic. So sometimes it takes a while to expose them to other aesthetics and make them accept that other aesthetics are okay, so that they can really express themselves according to their own culture and values.
Anything to add, Tom?
No, all good. I think it's been really well covered.
Yeah. Okay. Just been addressed. Yeah. Anything else?
Next question is from Khadija Bukhari. What strategies can help faculty recognize and address their own unconscious biases in curriculum design and classroom interactions?
Good.
Yeah, I think it's a really good. So a little reflective one is just the point I've already made around ensuring you're speaking to different students each time. So some research, I think it was at a Midlands University in the UK, found that staff were approaching students who shared their demographic, and that led to a perception of favoritism. So, literally, if you think about your own demographic, speaking to the students who had the same demographic as you. So just watching yourself, are you only engaging with certain students? The second one, I think, is having EDI training in a safe space as groups of staff to have honest conversations. I think it's really important to think that some of us are quite along the way with our EDI training. I think I've been involved in discussions around inclusivity for about 15 years. Some of our colleagues have only had 1 hour, so they are miles behind. And we've got to take them with us. It's all well and good having one really inclusive staff member, but everyone else is somewhere along the way, right? So I think giving this real time for people to speak honestly and allow people to make mistakes when they're having those discussions, because not everybody will be as far along as you are in those conversations. So there's some initial things. And then also the kind of things that we've heard about from Maha already in her presentations about things we can do in group.
I will add a couple of, thank you, Tom, all of that, of course. And if you don't have in your institution, if they're not offering this kind of diversity training, there's a very useful talk by someone called Binna Kandola. It's called Diffusing Bias. And in it, he talks about several things. First of all of us are biased. There's no human being who isn't biased. There are only people who think they're not biased, but everybody's biased, okay? The second thing is we're usually biased towards our own in-group. So whoever looks like us, that's who we're usually biased towards unconsciously. You can't get over this. Now, what helps a little bit is when you expand your circle of very close friends, and it's not just one, it's not like having a token friend who is different from you. It's about having, do you have 10 friends who are of the same kind of difference from you, you know? So like if, for example, as a Muslim, I'm not surrounded by a lot of atheists. And so if I had one atheist friend, I wouldn't understand atheism. I wouldn't understand why someone would choose that. But now I have like 5 atheist friends and I have different versions of atheism and I can understand and still love people who have very different religious beliefs than myself. But if you're not exposed to something, assume you have an unconscious bias to anything you haven't been exposed to very deeply. In the video that Bina Kandola uses, which I show in my class actually, he talks about a test from Project Implicit in Harvard called the IAT test, Implicit Association Test. You can search for it online. It's free. It's a very weird test, and a lot of psychologists don't like it, but a lot of other people find it very valid. And you can try it for different things, and it will tell you if you have a strong bias or a weak bias that way. Of course, it's not going to tell you if you're doing something in your classes that is biased per se, but it will tell you if you have slight biases. So it has like biases for like women in STEM, or bias based on skin color, or bias based on like thin and overweight people, and things like that. And it'll give you an idea, and just be willing to question yourself. Definitely something Tom said earlier, and I don't think he was answering this question, he was talking about something else, is when you're checking in with the student, make sure you're not always checking in with the same students all the time. Sometimes when you have some students who are very engaged and excited and smiling at you, your eyes will automatically go towards them. Try to make sure you're looking everywhere in the class. Try to make sure if you're the kind of person who uses humor, that you're not using sarcasm against a particular group. I was a computer scientist. A lot of my male professors would make fun of the girls when they said something stupid. I mean, they were saying something stupid. Nothing should feel stupid in a classroom, right? I understand why he was making fun of them, but it made other girls feel intimidated and not want to talk. So if you feel like there's a particular group in your class that are quieter than everybody else, then question whether there's something you might be doing that maybe culturally you're unaware of that might be harming them or making them uncomfortable. And make different ways for people to contribute to your class in ways that may not make them stand out, like contributing with, instead of speaking out, by contributing in writing or something like that, that allows people who may not feel comfortable like talking in front of others to contribute.
Also, when you do the testing, if I may add my 2 pennies worth, I think it's your perception of yourself is not always the best idea. I have looked at these tests and I've been very, very positive. And I think having another person who knows you well do it, apart from you, and then sort of looking at what the 2 tests are saying helps, it's really like get a sort of a more reality check. Yes, Fatma, any more questions?
We have another question from Khadija Bukhari. Can transformative learning be scaled to institutional or departmental levels, or is it always context specific to individual classrooms?
So transformative learning has several definitions, but what is important is it is based on the individual. Learning happens between people. So you can slap transformative learning on your university strategy and all over your walls at your university, but without proper teacher training and importantly peer review, so lecturers watching lecturers and giving each other feedback and lecturers feeling safe, I don't think you can achieve happy students or transformative learning without happy lecturers. So perhaps that's my final point, is you can't get happy students without happy staff. And staff who feel safe as well. So safe where they can take risks. Because actually, sometimes if you really want to engage students, you might need to do something a bit crazy in the class. If you have a very rigid system where people don't feel safe to experiment, then I guess you won't achieve it. But I think we need to get people talking about teaching, talking about engagement, watching each other teach, and going to events like this.
Anything to add, Maha? And I think this was the final question, Fatima. So
Yes.
Then aren't any more. There are different systems and it depends on what sort of institutional environment you come in. Do you feel safe or not safe? And even if it carries to the classroom, it makes a difference. Thank you so much, Maha and Tom. Maha, you set the models, the frameworks, and the amount of resources that you have left us will need a lot of experimentation before we even start to understand how to use them effectively. And like you both said, that it's not you do it one year and then this happens. It's something that you keep on reflecting upon your practice and keep on doing it every year, making those minute reflections and changes for the next time you teach that course. And Tom, you were like literally talked about student engagement, how student engage, what is it, how it is changing, and how we need to change, as the student engagement modalities change and their comfort level changes. And I think in intergenerational campuses, it is a real challenge for baby boomers like me to then relate to Gen Z and now the Gen, I think, X that's going to come. I see a lot of variance in how we both think. And I think it's not saying that the students are not engaged. I've always said it's we do not understand or speak their language, and that's why they are not engaged. So the onus comes back to the teacher that you have to understand. And I think that's what both of you said, that it's the student that's the fulcrum, the main focus. What does the student want? What is their perceptions? What do they think? What are their past experiences? What are their expectations moving forward? And unless you place yourself squarely within that framework, you as a teacher, and if you're thinking this is what I want, those don't go together. This is how I want to complete my course, or this is how I want the students to learn. That's not the right way. And you're right. We also encourage our faculty, Tom, that in the first week of when you introduce the course, you must get the feedback of the students and tweak your course. And even mid semester, if you think there are some changes that you need to make in how you're conducting the course. I think remarkable points. I see the small nuggets that people will have, participants will have taken away. We leave you with a poll as well. And are there any last, 1 minute, sort of a one sentence, Mahak, comment that you'd like to make about that would resonate with our participants? There's still around 300 plus from all parts of Pakistan and some from other parts of the world. One thing that you would really like them to chew and reflect, I'm going to ask that of each of you. Ji Mahak.
I think the main reflection I have after sort of also discussing with seeing the questions that we're coming with is I think our institutions, I don't think necessarily give faculty members enough time and support to apply all of what we're talking about now. I think a lot of times we blame faculty members for not putting in the time and the attitude, but I think institutions don't reward this kind of behavior. If someone isn't very equitable in their teaching, nobody says you're not going to get promoted. And we need to change that.
Yeah, that's true. I think point well taken, because there's so many things to do for the teacher. We have large classes in our part of the world. I don't know how it is with you, Maha. And then there is an expectancy of the teacher to do a certain type of assessment, a certain type of activity, student-centric teaching, and so on. And generally speaking, if I must say, there's not much sport happening if there is somebody needs hand-holding. That's not there. And a lot of faculty need hand-holding for some things that happen. So I think a lot of support needs to be provided for being innovative and trying to do new things or anything actually exciting in the classroom. Tom, your take? If one liner...
I would say is we can't sit still. I think assuming that things are going to go back to normal is not the case. Thinking we just need to get the COVID students through and it will go back to normal is not the case. We need to be planning for the university of the future and working in that direction. So that's what I would say. Yes.
Thank you so much. We do see that the polling is still underway and they're responding. So we will share the results with you in another minute, I think. Only 177 of the 300 participants right now have responded to the, and I'm going to share the results and stop sharing. Can you see the
Lovely.
results?
Yes, that's great.
Okay, so we have a pretty good idea. You get a resounding yes for both the points, and I think this has been the largest yes that we have got to the 2 points, Fatima, so far. So marvelous session. We don't need to say it. Your testimony is right there. And I can't thank you both enough. Again, immense gratitude and thanks a lot.
Thank you all. Wonderful to work with you all. Maha, wonderful to talk again and
Thank
good
you.
Yeah.
It
conversations.
was lovely to talk to you, Tom. Lovely to listen to everybody. Thank you for being such an interactive audience.
Yeah.
And
Thank you for the interactive session, actually, Maha. You made work double time.
and Tom kept going with the interactivity, so it was good.
Good, yeah. I love
it. Was a
the
good
type was amazing.
combination.
Yeah, that was
I've got to
good.
shoot off though, but lovely. And let's stay connected, everybody. Please, let's keep in touch.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Thank you, Fatima, as well. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you to our participants who have been with us throughout and who stayed on. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.